And the question is whether or not we should be in a position where you are, why can't the
Biden's town hall. I mean, what makes y'all think Biden talking for a straight hour off the cuff is a good idea? Where have y'all been?
Experts say we know that this virus is, in fact, it's going to be, or excuse me, we know why all the drugs approved are not temporarily approved, but permanently approved.
Yeah. This is what you get when you get off the cuff. You remember, before we even go in this town hall, y'all remember they said Donald Trump had dementia and he had cognitive decline? Y'all remember that?
If the rule you followed brought you to this, of what use was the rule?
Back here, 2 minutes.
It's true. A new Gallup poll shows that more than 75% of the public has very little confidence in legacy media like newspapers and TV news. But only 21% of respondents said they had a great deal of confidence in newspapers. Worst for TV news at 16%, which was only slightly less hated than Congress at 12%. But that's like being told you're only slightly more popular than chlamydia.
Oh, God.
We are not defunding the police.
And are there people who, in the Democratic Party, who want to defund the president?
Are there people in the Republican Party who think we're sucking the blood out of kids?
What is this shit?
Adrenochrome.
The idea that the Democrats or the Biden is hiding people and sucking the blood of children and no, I'm serious.
I think the media has done a terrible job on this. I think you yourself, while you're a nice guy, you're full of sanctimony. You become part of one of the parts of the problem of the media. You come on here and you have a monopoly on truth. You know exactly how things are supposed to be done. You are one of the reasons people can't stand the media. I'm sorry.
You're cracking me up.
It's your fault. You got to stop. I mean, that last segment that I just had to listen to of all of the people saying the same old stuff. Also, you're incredibly repetitive. It's week after week. I mean, you're the flip side of Donald Trump. Fake news, and you say virtuous news.
We just figure out what is real.
I mean,
I'm listening.
Well, figuring out what is real is not so easy, and most people don't want to turn to Brian Stelter to tell us what's real. I'm sorry.
Well, then why'd you bother coming on CNN a few times this week?
I'm a book salesman.
So in their mind, they might be confident. They might think that they're diehard, ready to go. But unfortunately, they're more like Tiger King. And they're putting themselves and their families in danger. And so what I would suggest is for those people who were first-time gun owners, if they did go out and buy a gun, I would secure that gun locked and unloaded and hide it behind the cans of tuna and beef jerky that you've stored in a cabinet. And, only bring that out if the zombies start to appear. And I don't think they are.
In Texas, 3 lawmakers who recently traveled to the nation's capital have now tested positive for the virus despite being fully vaccinated.
Over the weekend, 5 Texas Democrats who traveled to D.C. to stall their state's controversial voting rights legislation tested positive for COVID, even though they'd all been vaccinated.
CBS News has learned that 3 of those Texas Democrats who fled their state in order to stop that controversial voting legislation from getting passed and came here to D.C. have tested positive for COVID. Their caucus said they were all vaccinated before they traveled.
It doesn't suppress anybody's vote. It allows for very generous early voting, very generous absentee voting. Yes, it does require voter ID. If you don't see the need for that, then there are one or two circumstances here. Either you're so dumb you lose your place during sex, or you want to cheat. And those are your two choices.
More than 10% of the traveling party with these Texas Democrats now claim to have a breakthrough case. Is there any concern that this trip that was intended to advocate for voting rights is now a super spreader event in Washington?
Well, I would say that's not a characterization we're making from here. We certainly understand there will be breakthrough cases. Even vaccines that are incredibly effective are not foolproof. They're not 100% effective. We've seen that. Here's the good news, though. We know that these vaccines, that these individuals, I think, if I'm correct, have been vaccinated. It means that it protects from death. It protects from serious illness. It protects, for the most part, from hospitalization. So that is a good sign.
We have a pandemic for those who haven't gotten a vaccination. It's that basic, that simple. 10,000 people have recently died. 9,950 of them, or thereabouts, are people who hadn't been vaccinated.
Now that COVID-19, after contact with those Democrats, has reached the White House, what is your message to these Texas Democrats?
Our message continues to be thanks for standing up for voting rights and the rights of Americans to have their voices heard at the voting booth, and we appreciate their efforts in that regard.
They were vaccinated first. I'm sure they shoved little old ladies out of the way to get their vaccines first. They're all vaccinated. They're living in remote cabins.
And what's frustrating here is that, I'll just say it, we're going to end up going back to masking. And that's going to be a huge political issue. We're going to have people fighting in Walmarts about whether or not they have to wear their mask or on planes. We already are. We still are. But we're going to have to go back to masking. And the reason we're going to have to go back to it is because of the unvaccinated, because they're allowing the variants into this country and they are getting the vaccinated people sick. And the only way to keep it from passing to person, if you're not going to get the vaccine, is to wear a mask. But that fire hose of falsehoods has been spewing propaganda and lies for well over a year. And it's time to turn that spigot off. It's time to deprogram the cult leaders. It's time we do whatever we can to save their lives.
And I'm thinking about Louis Brandeis, the great Supreme Court justice, also from Louisville, who once said, "The greatest dangers to liberty lurk in insidious encroachment by men of zeal, well-meaning but without understanding." And who does that describe in American life right now? Well-meaning but without understanding, and of someone of zeal. It's Joe Biden, who frequently goes out and says things of a hyperbolic nature that turn out not to be true, that he has to walk back. He did it on Facebook. He says they're killing people. Now he says they're not. Was it misinformation when he said they were killing people? Look, I took the vaccine. I studied the data. I think they work. I think everyone should get it. And at the same time, I would just warn everybody out there, if you want the White House getting involved in censoring free speech, ask yourself this: would you have the same position if Donald Trump or some Republican were the president? I bet you would not. This is a dangerous, slippery slope, and Biden ought to stay out of it.
Paul, I mean, does Scott have a point here?
Is a great point. It's just not apropos of this issue, because nobody is saying that the government should censor. I'm certainly not. They should never censor Americans. Justice
Jen
Brandeis
Psaki
also
said it.
said,
Our friend Jen said it. Our friend Jen said it.
Well, I want to welcome back to the White House a good, loyal, and decent friend, His Majesty, and say his name. Say his name. We've been hanging out together for a long time. I met him back when he was in the situation his son is in, when his father was alive, and I was a young senator. And it's good to have him back in the White House. You know, I want to thank you, Your Majesty, for your enduring and strategic relationship with the United States. Say his name. For Jordan. And in addition to that, we were talking. We had an opportunity to speak just a moment in the diplomatic room, and in this pandemic. And we also want to thank you for your vital leadership in the Middle East.
Dr. Fauci, as you are aware, it is a crime to lie to Congress. Section 1001 of the U.S. Criminal Code creates a felony and a 5-year penalty for lying to Congress. On your last trip to our committee on May 11th, you stated that the NIH has not ever and does not now fund gain-of-function research in the Wuhan Institute of Virology. And yet, gain-of-function research was done entirely in the Wuhan Institute by Dr. Shi and was funded by the NIH. Dr. Fauci, knowing that it is a crime to lie to Congress, do you wish to retract your statement of May 11th where you claimed that the NIH never funded gain-of-function research in Wuhan?
Microphone.
Your microphone.
Senator Paul, I have never lied before the Congress, and I do not retract that statement. Senator Paul, you do not know what you are talking about, quite frankly, and I want to say that officially. You do not know what you are talking about. Okay, you get one person.
Let's read from the NIH definition of gain of function. This is your definition that you guys wrote. It says that scientific research that increases the transmissibility among animals is gain of function. They took animal viruses that only occur in animals and they increased their transmissibility to humans. How you can say that is not gain of function?
It is not.
It's a dance, and you're dancing around this because you're trying to obscure responsibility for 4 million people dying around the world from a pandemic.
And let's let Dr. Fauci.
I have to, well, now you're getting into something. If the point that you are making is that the grant that was funded as a sub-award from EcoHealth to Wuhan created SARS-CoV-2. That's where you are getting. Let me finish.
We don't know.
Well,
we don't
wait
know
a minute.
If it did come from the lab, but all the evidence is pointing that it came from the lab, and there will be responsibility for those who funded the lab, including yourself.
68% of folks overall are confident that Fauci is providing trustworthy advice on COVID. But that number goes down dramatically when all of a sudden you look at people who are ingesting their information primarily from conservative, hyperpartisan sites. So what's the game here? What is the purpose of this fixation on attacking Anthony Fauci?
Well, I don't think it's entirely a game. I think it's that Fauci is a very powerful public official who deserves and rarely gets tough questioning in almost any realm. He gets, frankly, a lot of fangirling and a lot of just sort of forum for his ideas, and he doesn't get a lot of pushback. Senator Paul understood the assignment here. He's asking about a tough subject that admittedly none of us are experts on, but I would like to know a lot more about. And despite his protestations, tough questions for Dr. Anthony Fauci are not attacks on science itself. This is something we should talk about. Further, Fauci has something to do with the numbers on his own level of trustworthiness. He has at least twice, and I will be gentle in saying, at least shaded the truth about his COVID pronouncements based on his own judgment on what the public can handle. Now, you may think those shadings of the truth were noble, that, for instance, saying that masks were not particularly efficient for helping protect you back in the beginning of the pandemic so that they could be in greater supply for health workers, that was the end result was okay. But it did seed distrust of him with good reason. He also has admitted saying that when it came to herd immunity, he looked at polling to base his statements on how much herd immunity would be the threshold that we needed. These two instances are just facts.
Mary Catherine, I want to.
Hold on. Those are just facts. And it is an issue that a very powerful public figure was found to be shading the truth about these things.
Dr. Fauci funded gain-of-function research. He can deny it all he wants. He can have his staff, who are beholden to him for their jobs, claim that somehow what is clearly gain-of-function research isn't gain-of-function research, but it was. He's culpable. He's lying about it. And he needs to be held accountable for it. And I, for one, really appreciate what Senator Paul did in that hearing to expose, really his equivocation on this, his lying about what he did and didn't fund, and his potential role in the development of a chimeric coronavirus that is now infecting the world.
It is the ability of false information to crowd out truthful information, of fear to spread and paralyze, of paranoia and hatred and conspiracy theories to capture the minds of millions, that poses a great threat in a time of crisis. Back in 2014, whenever these forces got strong and we risked being overwhelmed by them, my office developed a highly sophisticated and technical countermeasure that went by the initials PTFOT, that stood for Put Tony Fauci on Television. The ability to have a national icon like Tony as a messenger of science and information, of truth and education, was an invaluable asset at critical moments during the Ebola outbreak in 2014. But not every country has a Tony Fauci, and even Tony cannot be everywhere at once. Solving the challenge of hyperconnectedness and hyperinformation is absolutely critical for dealing with the dangers of a future epidemic. Once again, the burden falls on this community to take on the false information, the conspiracy theories, to tackle the Twitter trolls, and to create a communications environment that will permit and promote an effective epidemic response.
So why don't Republicans want us to learn how to not be racist? Why don't Republicans want kids to know how to not be racist?
Well, they're
And I
saying
think
it's too
that
young and it
is
makes
the question that illuminates this.
They said that it's too young and it makes it makes white kids feel bad and it gives them guilt about being white at too young of an age, or that they shouldn't have that or be taught that guilt at all, or anything that gives them that.
Yeah. Well, you know, I think here's the deal. Here's something that we know neurocognitively. Babies, when they are exposed to family members, neighborhoods, etc., of one race, their eye contact, we already know this from neuroscientists and neurosociology, etc., sociologists, etc., that babies already start to gravitate towards members of their own race when they are disproportionately exposed to just one race in their life. It doesn't mean that babies are racist, but what it means is that we already start to gravitate to communities and people that we already know are already acclimated to. And so to that, I don't think that children feel guilty. I think there's a responsible way for us to talk about how to be peaceful and treat each other with respect. And Republicans are using these words like critical race theory, which again is a law school curricula that is not even taught in schools. And their argument is, well, some teachers may be exposed to it. Oh, wow. So your child's teacher is anti-racist and is actually fluent in how to dismantle racism and the dynamics of racism in a classroom. Yeah. That is something that teachers should know how to do.
These are the individuals who give us the ideas of critical theory. So we go from conflict theory to critical theory. Now, this critical in critical theory is important because this critical means that you are assuming this hegemonic oppressive reality and you are critically analyzing this oppressive hegemonic reality with a view toward revolutionary overthrow of the hegemonic reality. So when you see critical in front of something, understand that there are the assumptions of this Marxist ideology, this Gramscian Marxist ideology. And theory here, it's not like, I have a theory about how this thing happens. Theory, when used this way in the social sciences, is more like the word worldview, critical worldview, okay? So this is the Frankfurt School. They become incredibly influential in academic institutions in the United States throughout the 40s, 50s, and 60s. So eventually we get critical legal studies. Critical legals. We're doing legal studies. We're not just doing legal studies, we're doing critical legal studies. Critical means that we're doing legal studies within the framework of the oppressor-oppressed dynamic. So the law as we know it is oppressive. How do we break that down in order to overthrow the oppressor? Growing out of critical legal studies is critical race theory. Derek Bell, Harvard law professor, is the father of critical race theory. Derek Bell had a protege by the name of Kimberly Crenshaw. Kimberly Crenshaw, his protege, was the mother of intersectionality, which is an outgrowth of critical race theory. You notice in the resolutions, it's critical race theory and intersectionality, okay? Critical race theory. Marx, Gramsci, oppressor, oppressed. These are the assumptions of critical race theory and the assumptions of intersectionality.
If you like this video, press like. If you love it, subscribe.